as an irrevocable fact. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Readings from Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 8th chapter, verse 8. Now I find it. Gantum Kritamatir Brahman Dvarakam Ratamastita Upalebe Bidavantim Uttaram Bhaya Vihvalam Gantum Kritamati Brahman Dvarakam Ratamastita Upalebe Bidavantim Uttaram Bhaya Vihvalam Kantum Kritamatir Brahman Dvarakam Ratamastita Upalebe Bidavantim Uttaram Bhaya Vihvalam. Please repeat. Kantum Kritamatir Brahman Dvarakam Ratamastita Uttaram Bhaya Vihvalam Kantum Kritamatir Brahman Mataji's Kantum Kritamatir Gantum, just desiring to start. Kritamati, having decided. Brahman, O Brahmana. Dvarakam, towards Dvaraka. Ratam, on the chariot. Astitaha, seated. Upalebe, so. Abidavantim, coming hurriedly. Uttaram, Uttara, Bhaya Vihvalam, being afraid. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. As soon as he seated himself on the chariot to start for Dvaraka, he saw Uttara hurrying toward him in fear. In purport, All the members of the family of the Pandavas were completely dependent on the protection of the Lord, and therefore the Lord protected all of them in all circumstances. The Lord protects everyone, but one who depends completely upon Him is especially looked after by the Lord. The Father is more attentive to the little son who is exclusively dependent on the Father. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukkam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Vangayate Girim Yat Aham Yat Kripatam Aham Bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Bhagadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Parishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhano Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Jai Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are hearing in this verse how Uttara is approaching Lord Krishna in fear, and her fear is because she noticed that Ashwatthama released a Brahmastra, and this Brahmastra is coming to kill her. And because this happened in Hastinapura, while Krishna was there, she had the opportunity to run toward him in fear. However, what I found interesting is that Srila Prabhupada explains, it's mentioned in later verses, that she was not asking for protection for herself, but for her baby, Parikshit baby, who was in the womb. And it is explained also, Srila Prabhupada explains that because by this time she was a widow, her husband Abhimanyu died in the battle of Kurukshetra, that custom in Vedic society was that widow enters the funeral fire of the husband. And in her case, because she was pregnant, she was it was how to say, socially acceptable for her to stay alive for the sake of having her son. And this was also the case when Pandava left body. Then he had two wives, Kunti and Madri, and Kunti stayed alive. She didn't enter fire because it was decided that she will take care of children of the 5 Pandavas. And then Madri, who was mother of Nakula and Sahadev, she entered the fire of Pandu, King Pandu. So this is for us very unusual cultural circumstance to understand that widows enter the funeral fire of their husbands. And especially for me, because I used to work as archaeologist, these cultural aspects of Vedic literatures are most fascinating to investigate, because these literatures openly speak about how societies used to live in the past. And I spent some years doing research on the subject, so this is for me fascinating to find out that there are literatures explaining how these societies used to live, which we can never find out just by excavating sites buried in the ground. And so what is interesting, what is hard to understand from today's perspective, where we try to see that death is the greatest danger, and it's unimaginable for us to see that there is some social circumstance which is more dangerous, or something that is socially higher than that. And in this case, it is separation. Because we know this because Srila Prabhupada explains that the reason why widows enter fire is because since their young age they were taught that their service to their husbands is their dharma, and they were also married at a young age, usually before they were 16. It was expected for a girl in a Vedic society to be married. And then their service to the husband and their children was their only social duty. So it was their purpose in life. So after losing husband, they would also lose this dharma of being a servant of a husband. So this is a social circumstance which today is, like I said, it's unimaginable. And that is why a widow would feel such a great separation and pain, because not only she would lose the husband, the person by that time she spent some time, and she loved very much, she served, but she would also lose her dharma. So that is the explanation why it was socially expected also, and considered that it's better for her to enter fire. Of course, we learn in a Vedic society this was done voluntarily, that she had a choice. She was not forced by her relatives. And it appears that all these situations that are described in the Bhagavatam, like Gandhari in the first canto, some chapters later we will read that when Dhritarashtra, he left home, he went to the forest, he meditated, he did this yogic, mystic meditation, and in this meditation he left body, his body went on fire together with the cottage, and then Gandhari, who accompanied him, she also entered the fire. Also in the Bhagavatam it's described that King Prithu, also when he left his kingdom, he went to the forest, he left body there, and his wife Archie, who accompanied him, she also entered the fire. So these descriptions are there in the Bhagavatam, and we will read about them. Also we see this theme of separation in our movement, in Lord Chaitanya's movement, is a major theme. because gopis, they were separated from Krishna. And Lord Chaitanya, he took this mood of separation from the gopis. And the consideration was also that for the gopis, this separation was worse than dying. And they often say that this is worse than death, separation from Krishna. This is, we would rather die than be separated. And even when Krishna was leaving and he was on a chariot and Akrura was taking him away from Vrindavan, and the gopis, they were desperate. They were trying to stop him. And at that moment, they did not even consider hiding their feelings, because before they were playing the roles of other men's wives. But at that moment, they didn't even consider that their reputation would be ruined. They openly expressed their feelings that they cannot be separated from Krishna. This is worse than anything for them. And Krishna said, "I'll be back. So you just wait for me, because I'll be back." So that was the reason why they kept living. Otherwise, there was no reason for them to stay alive. But because of Krishna's promise, they were thinking, but if he comes back and we are not here, he will be sad, and we cannot allow Krishna to be sad at any circumstances. So we would rather tolerate this unbearable pain of separation rather than do anything to make Krishna sad or to hurt him. And by showing us this example, what is love, how unselfish love can be, they are in our teachings, in our sampradaya, they are the highest examples of love of God, because they were completely doing everything for Krishna's pleasure. That this was the intensity of their love for him, even at their own, even going through, even suffering this separation from Krishna. So this is one circumstance where separation is worse than dying. And another circumstance is also, when I was thinking about it, the sati ritual, the entering of fire of the widow, it also seems that it was honorable. It was a considered socially honorable thing to do, because later Srila Prabhupada also explains that this ritual became forbidden by British colonizers, because the family, even if the widow didn't want to enter fire, she wanted to live, but the family forced her to enter fire. And apparently this was such a common practice that the Britishers had to pass the law to forbid this practice. So also what is unimaginable is that how can family members force their sister, mother, aunt into fire? This is something we today cannot understand, because we all, I mean, if we love anybody, it's our family. And this then I understood to be another social circumstance which is above that is also in ancient societies present, and that is infamy. That it was considered, because it was considered honorable thing to do, by the widows to enter fire. So if they don't enter fire, it was considered as infamous. And also the Shastras tell us that, because the Vedic literatures, Shastras, they give us this understanding that life is preparation for the next destination. And this next destination is what life is all about. And the whole Varnashrama system is organized around this concept that we have this life, we have our karma, and throughout this life we prepare for our next destination. So ideally, Shastras say, this destination should be spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan. Less ideally, it would be heavenly planets where a person could enjoy. And even less ideally than that, I don't know what is causing this, is a better birth. Then it was considered a better birth is a birth in a better social varna, or with the better social circumstances. And that's why women were encouraged to think about their husband when they leave their body, because then they would get a man's body. And men were encouraged to leave their family situation, because there was, if they would leave body within the family, then there would be this danger of being of thinking about their wives when they leave their bodies, and then they would take birth as a woman, which was considered lesser birth. So this is what Shastras explain. And of course today to speak about these things is very controversial, I would say, because in the modern world these social circumstances are not there. We don't say anymore that modern society, civilization, we don't say anymore that women's birth is less than men's birth, and we don't speak about anymore how this life is preparation for the next life. Rather, we speak about equality as a social value, and we also speak about, as society, about economical progress and enjoying the senses. So these are the values of the modern world, and this ancient social circumstances where some hires were higher than that are completely, they're abandoned, they're misunderstood, they're considered primitive, and they are completely rejected. That is why for us who are trying to follow Shastra, we are trying to, in a way, revive Vedic society, Vedic values, Vedic rules. We are in a situation where it's not clear what is our legacy. Do we imitate these societies? Do we go back to widows entering fire? Do we go back to fighting on equal grounds? That was another consideration I wanted to say about infamy, that the Kshatriyas, they were fighting on equal grounds. This was considered honorable, that if somebody attacks you with a chariot and a bow and arrow, then you defend yourself also with a chariot and bow and arrow. But if somebody attacks you with a knife, then you fight him with a knife. this is how Kshatriyas were fighting in Vedic society. That is why also it was considered honorable for a Kshatriya to leave body in a battle rather than avoid battle. And this was also what Krishna was saying to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna, he displayed compassion toward his enemies, who were his family members and his teachers, and he was reluctant to fight them. But then Krishna told him, why you think that they will see that because of compassion you spared their lives? They will not see it that way. They will think that you are a coward and that you refused to fight in the battle because you were afraid, and then they will laugh at you. So your compassion is misplaced in this situation. And Krishna also says, for Kshatriya, infamy is worse than that. So this is, I wanted to bring these 2 points, how in Vedic society infamy is worse than that, and separation is worse than that. So that was the question in this modern world. How do we follow this? How do we follow? If we follow, how do we follow? And historically, we can see that everywhere in the world, before the big empires, the Vedic, if we call this type of society Vedic, then we can see that this Vedic society was prevalent everywhere. Because, like, from my profession of archaeology, I was learning how everywhere on the planet there are these opulent burials of great kings, and in these burials you find many riches, like golden pots, ornaments, necklaces, earrings, different bangles, vessels, and there are also traces of animals being sacrificed and also of humans being sacrificed. And for archaeologists, I think this is why most of the people, who, if they want to be archaeologists, this is the most exciting part, that you can find, you will maybe find some grave, some tomb, and then it's going to be full of gold, and this is wonderful, then you can become famous. And even if you cannot take it, it will be displayed in the museum, but people are very much attracted to these riches of the ancient times. So this kind of riches we find everywhere in the world. And then it is common understanding among archaeologists that, oh, so these people, they did these rituals because they were concerned about the afterlife of the king. And then these jewelry and vessels and food and sacrificed animals, so they accompany the king in the next life, and then he goes to so most of them, they had this idea that they go to heavenly planets, and the understanding was prevalent. We have in China rich burials of kings, in Europe, Middle East, practically everywhere. And then when Kali Yuga started, people they learned to organize themselves in empires. And empires destroyed Vedic cultures, Vedic society all over the world. First of all, their idea of fighting was not about fighting on equal grounds between warriors who use the same weapons, and then if somebody dies in an honorable way, which means dying honorably means fighting on equal grounds. Then the understanding of Vedic society was that this warrior goes to a better place, usually heavenly planets. So the empire idea of fighting was different. Their idea was what can be described as sneaky fighting. They were organizing armies, and then they were conquering other lands, and whoever they conquered, they made slaves. And if these people refused to surrender and become their slaves, they would kill them. And so they would also kill innocent women and children, which was unimaginable in Vedic society. Kshatriyas, they were only fighting Kshatriyas. They were not killing women and children. Also, the battles, they took place in an open field. They were not, Kshatriyas were not organizing sieges around some cities. But these early empires, this was exactly what they were doing. They would they would organize an army. They would think very carefully about inventing some kind of technology which would enable them to kill people effectively. And then they would go and they would try to siege some city. Is it siege? Is it correct word? And this is how they conquered all these societies which were organized on Vedic principles. And this happened in Europe, because I come from Europe, so I'm more familiar with European history. But from what I see, this also happened in India, that these Vedic societies, because the whole outlook on life is different, then they don't have a system of defending themselves if such an empire invades them. And this happens everywhere in the world. And we see here Ashwatthama, he was the first imperial fighter, thinking, I have to kill my enemies at all, no matter what, at all cost. And he was attacking, therefore, not only his enemies, but also innocent women and children. So he was the first one who started this practice in Kali Yuga. And also another interesting aspect, historical, was that because in Europe, the first empire who was organized on these so-called new values was Roman Empire. And they were very good historians also. So they were describing their achievements, or I mean, from their perspective, they were achievements, military achievements, but actually they were just aggressors destroying the lands and people who lived around the empire. So they conquered one after another, ruthlessly, these societies. And often they were describing how these societies, they just don't want to be slaves. They cannot accept this position that somebody else comes and attacks them, and so they become slaves, but it's better for them to be slaves. They still get to live. No, there were so many societies which they just decided it's better to live body as that it's better to live body as a free person, as a citizen of my own community. So even if the community is destroyed, it's better that I live a body as a community of this, as a member of this community, than to become a slave. And then the consideration again was that this is because it's more, they will get more auspicious birth in their next life. And there are many historical examples. The most famous one is, I think, the siege of the Masada, which was in today's Israel. It was a hill fort, and people were defending themselves, but because the Roman army, they had this military strategy of organizing a siege, and then the inhabitants of the city, they had no supply of food or even water. This is what Romans, they would often do. They would cut the water supply, and then they would just wait for the people to come out. They were not engaged so much in open fighting. They were just doing this, mostly doing these sieges of the native settlements. And then often in this Masada, the population, they rather kill themselves than being captured. And also in Celtic, there's famous Celtic settlement in France, and there's a historical record of a hero, Vercingetorix, who was trying to fight the Romans, but he was retreating, and then he brought everybody to this Alesia is called. It's also a hilltop settlement, and when the Romans organized a siege, then everybody just decided it's better to die than become a slave. So I am saying all this because for me it's this difference between the Vedic culture and today's modern culture, world, society, civilization, how we call it. The difference is so big, so unimaginably, the difference is so big, yes, that we cannot just understand all these things within today's world. And the question is, for us followers of Lord Chaitanya and followers of our Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, is how do we relate? Do we imitate these societies? Do we try to imitate them, but we still try to make these principles practical? Do we just keep what is useful and then we leave what is problematic? How do we organize ourselves in Varnashrama? Is it possible? Can it be done? Or we also, the big question is, because Srila Prabhupada, he spread the movement within 10 years, and he didn't have time to organize Varnashramas, so he left us with this legacy of, we know today that this is what he wanted, but our legacy is to understand what was, how is it possible? What was Prabhupada's vision, and how is it possible? Can we do it? And if we can, do we as religious community, do we break off from the mainstream society, which there are many examples in the past of societies who did that. I can name a few for the sake of understanding what happens to these societies. There were in Europe Cathars who were also a religious community, and they also like to organize their settlements outside of the so-called mainstream societies. So they were building big castles in hilltops. Somehow it seems for a religious community, they have this idea that breaking away means finding some secure place in nature. This is how they think. So now we are gonna have our own separate, proper dharmic religious way of life. and not be influenced by mainstream sinful people. And then what happens usually in history is that because these religious communities, because they're pious and they follow Dharma, they start becoming wealthy. They have agriculture products, cows. So, and also, as Shastras say, if we follow Dharma, then the demigods reward people who follow Dharma. This is also the understanding. And then the future of those communities is always that if they become a little bit, almost little bit wealthy, then immediately they get caught attention of the mainstream society, and then they're finished. It's just that whoever the emperors, they just send the army, they're finished. So all this in medieval France, these religious communities, they were all destroyed. I mean, killed. And also, for example, religious orders like Templars, when they became wealthy, they were also destroyed. Finished. So, historically speaking, we see that to break off from the mainstream society, not such a good idea. Then there is also the other perspective that if we just stay, if we just not consider, if we just take our process without the Varnashram Dharma, just we disregard it because it's not practical, then tendency is to not take it seriously. Tendency is to become lenient or lazy, or just consider on our own that we are advancing, while in reality, because we are so much exposed to activities and habits that are not conducive to religious life, then we just don't become aware how these are influencing us. Or our own conditioning is so strong that we are even unable to practice the minimum of requirements of dharmic life. So then the question is, what is the future? Do we stay mainstream and just hope for the best, and we just forget Varnashram, we forget Vedic society? Of course, we read literature, we understand this is how people used to live. This is these are our ancestors, this is the religion we belong to. We accept that, but we just take it that this way of life is not practical today. So do we take this direction, or we break off and just say, no, we take that we live in our communities, and we try to stay away from mainstream society altogether. So my understanding in my experience of being a devotee is that what our acharyas wanted for us was to find a middle way, and also what Prabhupada wanted for us is to find a middle way. In my language there is an expression that the middle way is the golden way. I don't know if that is in English, same situation. So that if you avoid extremes and you find a solution in between extremes, that is the best solution. So then we see today we have devotees who are living in cities, then there are also devotees living in communities, and there are different communities. There are communities, especially I understand in India, there are communities where people can live without electricity, and they just have a source of water, and then they have cows, they grow their own food, and it's possible to live like that. Or they even make their own cloth, which is, I think, what Prabhupada wanted. So there is self-sustainability, and the community is able to produce everything that they are required. And then there are also communities where people use electricity, and there are houses, and some people, they go to work, but then the community is also there. I visited some communities, like in Europe, New Dam, I visited. So it's a nice example of this kind of community where they are trying to follow Vedic values, and I think in most of the houses they don't have electricity, as I understand. But then some houses they do have, because there is also because they have a system where they organize, they invite other people to come. It's called spiritual tourism, and then they need facilities for people who are coming there to sleep or to accommodate them. Then there are also communities. I visited Ambik, where there is temple, and there is a huge land owned by the temple, by ISKCON, also part of wood. In Sweden, they have very big areas of forest, uninhabited. So I think this Ambik temple is in one such environment. And then devotees are allowed to build houses there. So the land is the temple land, but the devotees build their own houses. And I liked this idea, because usually the concern for devotees is security to live in a community, and then having their own house is one consideration how security is achieved. And I also heard about other communities like Sharanagati in Canada, where devotees, they just live together, and they're a little bit off. They're in the wilderness. It's a village in a forest also, and then everybody owns their own house. And as I understand, they manage the community with some kind of board. So it's not some strict structure. It's just that everybody has their own land, and then they all live as neighbors. So these are some of the communities I heard about, and that was my impression, that this question of how do we live, how do we try to approach this question of following Varnashrama, is that we take the middle way. And also because Krishna here, Srila Prabhupada speaks about protection, and in the context of Vedic society and Srimad Bhagavatam, when we speak about protection of Krishna, so what is implied is that Krishna, he protects our devotion, he protects our Krishna consciousness, and he protects devotional service. This is the Bhagavatam perspective. And then life, when you read Vedic literature, it's so, because of course we are afraid to die, and we don't want to lose our family members and friends. But this is from when we read Vedic literature, we just see stories how people live, and then when they die, they go somewhere else, and they continue live. They just die as that person in that life, but they continue their life. So the whole Bhagavatam is meant to prepare us for the moment of dying, and in a way that it's almost scandalous to say in today's age, in a way that we are not afraid, that we will know in that moment Krishna will be there, just as Uttara, she was afraid. And then Krishna was there, and she ran toward his lotus feet to ask for protection. So what Bhagavatam is teaching us, also what Parikshit Maharaj is teaching us, that in that moment, which is inevitable, Krishna will be there, that we are devotees, so we will be protected. And this is the message of the Bhagavatam, that we are by practicing Krishna consciousness, we are preparing for meeting Krishna, and especially everything we do in life is going to be tested at the time of leaving body. And then Srimad Bhagavatam is giving us this encouragement that don't worry, Krishna will be there, he will protect you. And you just, if you think of him, if you approach him, this is what you have to do, then he for sure will be there. And our chanting is the preparation for thinking about Krishna at all times, and especially when we are in danger. And of course, the greatest danger is when we approach end of life, which can happen, as we see for Parikshit, it can happen even to a child in a womb. So let me stop there and ask if there are any questions, comments, suggestions, corrections.
Could you please comment or actually give me advice? So I have an aunt. My uncle recently passed away under very, COVID. So it was sudden. They were together for 30 years, and she's really, really not just sad. I mean, she doesn't want to live. And all the family members, obviously, are trying to encourage her to live on, blah, 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 blah. But she really doesn't want to live. So if I support her and tell her about the sati, that it's normal to feel that way, that, you want to kill yourself, then I will be guilty of encouraging her to die. So what do we as devotees tell our relatives who are in this situation? You've given a wonderful class. If she was a devotee, I would tell her all that. But what do I tell a person who feels that bereavement, who wants to go after her husband, but socially it's unacceptable for me to encourage her or even to acknowledge that this is a normal feeling?
Yes, thank you. Great question. I kind of tried to avoid speaking about the crisis, but today it's very much connected. So what I wanted to say also is that the sign of difference of opinion, this is a sign of a healthy society. We see in our society, devotees have different opinions about anything. Just because there are just as there are different opinions in the bigger society. And we come from the bigger society. So it's normal that we have also different opinions. And we don't have to all agree. This is why this idea that we all have to think the same. This is the idea of the empires. In empires, everybody thinks the same. And diversity is not allowed. Variations are not allowed. Everything is controlled. While in Vedic society, diversity are embraced and varieties are celebrated. And that is why in Vedic society you have different models of living. People who live in the mountains, they don't live the same way as people who live in the villages on the river. And everything is adjusted to environment. And that's okay. So I would, of course, never give somebody advice. What do I say to? So I think this depends on the family members. What you feel like, what is your relationship that you tell her. So it's not up to anybody to consult what you say to a family member who is sick. So it is your private. It is your private consideration, just as in Vedic society, it is our privacy. Yes, that I would say. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Okay. Also, I have a question about your statement that every devotee, for his security, wants to have a little house. You kind of mentioned that. So, as a person who owned houses and other things, I can tell you it's a headache. So I don't see the point encouraging people of building houses or owning real estate. So I've been quite direct about that. So I think it's time that we will stop encouraging people to create communities and everything when there is so many houses already empty, for example, in Mayapur.
Mayapur, yeah, Mayapur.
Yeah,
Is also
not just
community.
Mayapur, everywhere. So just saying that maybe it's time to encourage more preaching instead of, build a house, have a, what do you call a security, which is absolutely not, because government can come right up. Some of the communities in Russia have experienced that, where government came and took the land away. So like you were saying in France and other places. So I just want you to clarify, when you said that a lot of devotees feel like this is a security, so should we encourage that trend, or should we just break it down to them and tell them it's more trouble than it's worth? Why just not preach? Rent a flat if you can. If you can't, let your friends give you a flat or something like this. So because every day I see this, that people spend their life keeping a job they hate just for the little security. So, but they are happy with harinams and other things. Shouldn't we just politely explain to them that this is the way to go? Don't build houses, just.
Well, it's very late, but okay, I will answer that. Okay. So I was very interested, because I said I was working as an archaeologist, so I was interested when I came to India to learn how did people in India live before they were attacked by Muslim invaders and British colonizers. And I found that because this was not so long ago, and there are many historical records, and obviously there are many temples who are still there from that time. This was not so long ago. I found one article very interesting, which is describing how 500 years ago, or something like that, or maybe 1,000 years ago, there was, they found a community where there was a village and a temple and a gurukul. I guess the article was mostly about the gurukul. And then they explained this was the typical Indian village, where they had center of the village was temple, and the temple had gurukul, and the temple was the center of education. And what I liked was that they said that usually temple owned 35% of the village. the land was owned by the temple, and then the rest was owned by private owners who are engaged in agriculture and production of the food and everything else. So I thought that this India before, as India was before it was attacked by invaders, that this is the perfect model for I thought that this in the Indian model is what I think this is the model that influenced our acharyas and Srila Prabhupada. And we see also Lord Chaitanya when he was living, he was also he was living in a time where this Vedic culture was still prevalent. He was following Vedic culture, and when we read descriptions of the pastimes in Lord Chaitanya, we are reading about Vedic culture in India. So I think, at least in India, that this model is perfect for us. And I don't know, I think I would expect that in different countries there are different circumstances, but there's nothing wrong. This was the tradition. It's not that the temple would own the whole village. That there was always, like, the bigger percent of the village was owned by people who living. So that is, as I understand, that's the Vedic model. That temple owns 30%, 35% of the village, and then the rest is owned by private citizens who then engage in agriculture. And temple activities are based around temple worship and education. That's the model. And how much we follow this model in Mayapur, that's completely different topic and different class. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.